part of my research is on video games and, philosophy and popular culture, sort of bringing philosophy to a more popular audience. I wouldn't have thought about that, but I think you're making a compelling case. You can have anything you want, but you better not take it from me. It's just Hobbes.
Better guy than me. I shot everyone. I was like, I will do anything for Ellie.
The narrative that Joel was a villain was mistaken. And so I think parents identify with that more clearly than non-parents. Yeah, I would do anything to protect my kids. I think that the thing that makes the second game so special was the thing that made it really so controversial.
I have no concerns. I'm ready to buckle up, strap in, put on my space helmet, open up my journal, and ready to go.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Prof Noctis Weekly Show. I am here as always with Evan. What's up, Evan?
Hey everybody, thanks for being here.
And today we're really excited to bring in an author, a professor of philosophy, Joshua Horn. He has written, or at least compiled, I guess, edited, The Last of Us and Philosophy, which I have right here, which is a compilation of works from a number of different experts in the field talking all about the philosophy behind The Last of Us. So we're really excited. Thanks for being here today, Joshua. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're delighted. Evan and I, as we were preparing for this lecture series on The Last of Us, preparing for playthroughs and episode discussion of the TV show, this quickly became one of the tomes that we needed to dissect. And so I've got my entire community and my students reading through this book throughout the course of the semester. So it's a real treat for you to be here. And I mean, we even got Evan to read, so it's so good.
Wow, it's amazing. What's funny is I had to learn how to read in order to read this specific
really
book.
Important.
So it was I was kind of hooked on phonics on the beginning of the week, and then I think this interview was later in the week.
Duolingo to the max level, really.
Well, actually, Wade only sent me the book in Spanish, so I had to learn Spanish first and then figure it out. So, Josh, I just called you Josh like we'd been friends. Joshua.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, great. So, Joshua, you are a professor of philosophy. Tell us a little bit about kind of where you teach now and kind of how you got to where you are. And then we're going to talk a little bit about kind of your love for video games and why you would even think about writing and compiling a work around a video game and philosophy.
Yeah, so thanks for that. I grew up in Kentucky. I did all of my education in Kentucky, did my undergraduate work at Morehead State, and did my master's and PhD work at the University of Kentucky. So Kentucky born and raised and educated the whole way through. I've been playing video games, I think, since the original Nintendo Entertainment System when I was 5 years old.
One of us. Love it.
One of us.
One of us.
And I keep thinking I'm going to grow out of it, and I just keep staying involved. Where do I even go?
Where do you do now? So tell me where you teach now and kind of what your kind of day-to-day looks like. So you do your grad school work, and then you find yourself, you don't live in Kentucky anymore. You've moved to a different university.
Yeah, I work at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, which is right in central Wisconsin. It's a regional university that's very much like Morehead State. So there's about 8 or 9,000 students here. And when I was hired, I was hired with a joint appointment in philosophy and political science. So I was teaching some classes in poli-sci too. And then so over the course of my career here, I shifted over to teaching full time in philosophy, and I teach classes in everything from intro all the way up to metaphysics and philosophy of religion, history of philosophy. Teach those classes fairly regularly, and then we just haven't developed a new program that's really popular with students, and it's a concentration in law and justice.
Oh, cool.
So there's a lot of students that come here that are interested in law, thinking about law school or some kind of law related field, and engaging with philosophy in that
That's
way.
awesome.
It's really great.
That's a great campus size too. Students can almost kind of, you recognize all the same faces kind of when you walk around. It's a little different than like a Kentucky or an Alabama or like a Georgia. We're actually, I realize we're kind of spread across the SEC. We're not supposed to like each other here. This is a real melding of the minds of the
Today we lay down our arms, you know.
So you mentioned that you grew up with the NES and that your love for video games kind of started when you were 5. Tell us a little bit about what it was that kind of captivated you about games, and just help us tell the story of some games that maybe you've enjoyed or some of the games that have been impactful for you, because we grew up with them as well, and here we are still talking about them later. You're writing books about them. That's crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm very lucky to be at an institution that sort of gives me the freedom and respect to research what I want to research on. And part of my research is on video games and, philosophy and popular culture. So we're bringing philosophy to a more popular audience. And I take that very seriously. Philosophy has a bit of a PR problem where people don't really know what it is that we do and why it's valuable. And so the popular culture is a way to meet people where they're at. It's a way to come to them and say, hey, you're interested in this thing. Philosophy can help you think more deeply about that. And, my first publication ever, when I was still in graduate school, was on the Legend of Zelda. There was a book that came out on the Legend of Zelda, and I wrote a piece on that. There's a new book coming out on the Legend of Zelda that's in works now, that's supposed to come out later this year, early next year, I think.
Oh, wow.
And I've got a piece in that. But that's sort of, I think, going to be a launching point for a broader project. But I've published stuff on BioShock and maybe 1 or 2 pieces on God of War. So I'm playing all sorts of different games, all the different kinds of games, very narrative-focused games, I think.
Yeah.
And I think, like any good piece of source material, philosophy can say something about it. It doesn't matter what you're reading, Moby Dick, or whether you're reading or watching Citizen Kane, or whatever it is. Philosophy can help you think more deeply about it. I think the unique thing about video games in particular, though, is that there's an active dynamic to it. When you're watching something or reading it, it's sort of passive in the sense that it just unfolds the same for everybody, maybe.
Right.
But in the game, you're sort of actively embodying these characters. You're shaping their stories. Yeah. That's really engaging. So I think video games can have that sort of unique way to engage with the source material.
That's what's been really interesting with me in my research. And one of the ways that I try to explain it to people, especially to non-gamers, because that's usually the people that are funding our research, right? We're trying to explain it. And one of the things that I always say is, at the very basic level, when you talk to kids, you've got kids, right? So when you talk to kids who are playing video games, they never say that Mario saved the princess. They always say, I did. Yeah. And this is just a small little clue that there's something going on in the brain that says there's a first-person narrative that's being formed here, and it's an avatar. And I think that it's so cool. Like, I love that researchers and professors and teachers like you are doing this kind of thing. There's more of us. I love that, which is really exciting. I'm really curious about philosophy for the students, explaining philosophy for the students that may be watching this today and viewers that are like, I think I have a concept of philosophy, but what is it and why does it matter? What would you say to an intro class or maybe an elective class where people are just in it because of a course requirement?
Yeah, so my daughter came home and she was telling, this was like last week, and she said, Daddy, I was telling my friends that you taught philosophy. And she said, then I realized I had no idea what I mean. I don't know what it is. She's 10. And so what I said is that philosophy is a discipline that tries to help us understand ourselves and the world around us. And the primary means through doing that is argumentation. And almost everybody does philosophy. They don't realize that they're doing it, but everybody's trying to understand the world. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about something as highfalutin as does God exist or do we have free will, or whether it's something more close to home where they're at, which is like, did Joel do the right thing? When you defend a claim with evidence, you're sort of doing philosophy. Which is why it's such a big playground. There's philosophy of religion. There's philosophy of science. There's philosophy.
Yeah.
It can meet people wherever they're at. And so what I tell students is this is valuable because you're already doing it. And my job is sort of to help you do this a bit better. I think things like the Last of Us book are really important because, it takes something where they're at that they're interested in, and it says, let me help you think more deeply about it in a way that you might not have thought about before. Let me show you something or draw attention to something that you might not have considered. Let me say something that you might disagree with. That's great. It's more fun when we can disagree with each other and do it in a respectful and civil way instead of just, everybody touting the same position.
I love that you just said that. That should be amplified to the end of the earth, right?
Yeah.
When we can disagree with one another, that's actually a great thing because, I mean, there's a mutual growth that's happening there.
Yeah, I agree.
I like that phrasing too. It's argumentation. It's knowing how to structure your argument. It's intentionality. It's approaching it, but also recognizing my argument for this idea may not necessarily be me. Like every single thing that I think doesn't have to be deeply personalized to where if you challenge it, it's offensive to my core. It's just this general idea of argumentation, and that's a challenging place to be. Now, for you, you talk about this kind of spark of philosophy as a way, hey, listen, as your professor, I'm going to help you learn how to do this better, and how it helps us think deeply. And you said, everybody's trying to make sense of the world, right? And we're just trying to do it with the things around us. I wonder how you do it with your students, but before you talk about how you help students get introduced to that concept, when did you first start thinking deeply about video games? Is there a particular moment or a story for you personally that sticks out to say, this one kind of stuck with me a little bit? You mentioned Zelda. Mario, I didn't think too deeply about the motivations to save the princess with Mario when I was playing it on the NES after daycare when I was a child. But there started to become stories for me that started to open up. Half-Life was a big one for me, where I started as a silent protagonist. I was really curious what was happening. Why is he beating people with these crowbars? Like, it's one of those things where you start to ask the question, what is the motivation here? And why is this making me think about my life? I wonder what that game or moment might have been for you early on, and then how you introduce those students to this idea of thinking deeply in a way that is approachable and actionable.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in terms of video games, probably the first video game that comes to mind that I've not written on this, I have very little recollection of it because I played it so long ago. And I played it before I really started my philosophical training, was Final Fantasy IX. And so they're like the kinds of questions that it raised. I mean, these are like deep philosophical questions about meaning and purpose, and and as a lot of RPGs, especially Japanese RPGs, really help us think more clearly about those kinds of questions. I don't know the first game that I thought after my philosophical training started that I wanted to go back to. I mean, it might have been The Last of Us. I don't know. I played The Last of Us when it came out, and I mean, at that point I was defending my dissertation
and defending Ellie from clickers and all other.
I'm sure it happened earlier than that, but I agree. Not every video game, I think, has to make us think philosophically in the same way that not every piece of art or music or television or movie or something needs to make us think philosophically. But certainly, I think the best ones do.
Well, I think some of the sense making coming online just kind of naturally as you grew as a person is an interesting way that happens too. There's not always this aha moment that like, oh, I think I'm awakened to the fact that something else is going on. And I think that
Yeah.
Wade, you talk about that experience with your students too. There's not always this moment that clicks, but sometimes it's just slowly by the fire as you're wrapping up the semester where students start to open up and they realize the journey that they've been on. Wade, what are you curious about?
Well, first of all, I'm curious about your Final Fantasy IX experience. We have a lot of Final Fantasy fans in the viewership,
Yeah.
and it makes sense because my dissertation was on Final Fantasy 15. We've done 16,
Oh, wow.
7, and all this kind of stuff. But I'm just really curious, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask, for the sake of all of our fans that are champing at the bit. Can you give us a snippet of Final Fantasy IX and what it did philosophically for you? Just some of those questions.
It's a totally fair question, and I hesitate to even bring it up because I think I played it when it came out, and
Sure.
and then I've not returned to it since. So,
But maybe a remake coming soon. There's rumors. So.
yeah, I mean, I keep thinking I want to go back to it. I don't remember the details. I remember the feeling of thinking
Yeah.
the first time when it came out, or when I played it the
Yeah.
first time, and I don't even know how old I was. I mean, I had maybe a teenager or something. I was
Yeah.
like, holy cow, I've never thought about whether life has meaning or what that even means. That's
Yeah.
the meaning of life is not the kind of question that I'm even really that interested in now. And it's not something that drew me to philosophy in the beginning. So,
So what was it that did draw you to philosophy in the beginning?
Yeah.
so what I started my undergraduate career in 2003, and I grew up on the Bible Belt in Eastern Kentucky, and it was common knowledge, it was common assumption. You didn't question it that there was a good, powerful, wise God that oversees the universe. And then I was in the 11th grade when people flew planes into buildings, and so I was trying to think, what kind of God is going to permit this kind of suffering, and what does this mean for free will? Given my background, that was the kind of the classic problem of evil stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what drew me to philosophy at the beginning was how do I make sense of the nature of God? How do I make sense of the nature of free will? How do I make sense of these kinds of questions? And I found that philosophy it's not that it provided me the answers to those things, but it gave me room to ask the questions in the right way. And to organize my own thoughts about it and try to investigate it and show that it's okay to investigate it, that it's a good thing to be questioning these things.
Yeah.
And so I think that has carried through even to my career now. I mean, those are the same kinds of questions that I'm interested in now in philosophy of religion and the kind of philosophers in the 17th and 18th centuries that engaged with those questions.
Yeah.
That is, I hear that origin story from my students so often. And in a lot of ways, that started my own journey through religious studies. It was the question of, so I'm just a year ahead of you. I was a senior in high school when 9/11, that really kind of hit me as far as, where is God? What is happening, and how do you make sense of the world? And so I think that a lot of people in our generation and after are trying to make sense and make meaning from a lot of things. And I think it's really, really essential for us to have all of these kind of tools.
Yeah.
When it comes to the way that you have looked at, say, The Last of Us and kind of shifting over to some of these things now, I'm really curious, do you still use that kind of lens of how to make meaning of some of the bad, the evil, the terrible and suffering that you see in the world, or has it evolved in any way from a philosophical standpoint?
There are questions and there's discussions in the games, and the I'm sure the show will get into this at some point, where the characters are really wrestling with those very same questions. I mean, Joel's certainly wrestling with the questions about Sarah. There's a great conversation in the synagogue in the second game with Dana, where they're talking about the importance of prayer and what that means, and there's a chapter in the book about whether religion is even possible in this kind of world and what that means.
Yeah.
By the way, one of my favorite chapters in the entire book.
Yeah.
I was like, that just hits, right?
Yeah. When I was putting the book together, I had in mind when I pitched the book to Wiley, these are some of the kinds of topics and questions that, authors might engage with, and that I was hopeful that we would get. And I was surprised that almost none of my choices became chapters. When the authors submitted their work, I was flabbergasted by the things that they were talking about that I didn't even recognize as important. And so if I'm learning things about The Last of Us that I didn't recognize, and I probably thought about this as much as anybody outside of Naughty Dog.
Yeah.
I know that the readers, your audience, is going to find something there that's going to help them think more deeply about the source material.
You talk about this idea of not feeling like you were able to ask questions to understand better, in this case around suffering that you talked about in the 11th grade, and then feeling like the tension of, well, no, I have to figure out a way to understand this more. It's almost like you were compelled to do it. It wasn't something that you could sit in anymore. There's a bit of maybe an intellectual restlessness and maybe spiritual restlessness, it sounds like you were describing. But then you're also saying that, listen, things that are claimed to be true should welcome questions. And actually, things that are claimed to be true almost demand that they be questioned and understood better. When it comes to The Last of Us, and you get this radical departure in this apocalyptic setting, there's a lot of the chapters in the book that frame the apocalyptic setting as kind of that laboratory to explore these philosophical concepts in a more pure or core way without some of the broader complications of a real-life example. But one of my favorite things about the book is that then it takes the core concept and then brings in real life examples that kind of work. And so there's this working knowledge that the door gets opened by the story. The book illustrates the concept. The chapter demonstrates it and substantiates it, right? Says, if this is true, this is the ways that it is true in this story. And if it's true in this story, here's some ways that it's true potentially in your real life or in real life examples, or especially with like political struggle and things like that. It talks about that. I wonder for you, as you're curating these things, you talk about how things went a direction that maybe you didn't expect. What would you say the shape of the book is, and what surprised you the most about kind of the arc that it went, that people were more interested in telling certain stories than others? And how do you decide kind of how to shape that versus allowing people to kind of write about what they're passionate about in a kind of a text like this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is the first book I've edited. I've edited journals, but this is the first book that I've edited, and I learned a lot in the process. And I thought that it would be more me or doing background work and organizing material, and it's more of a joint effort. I'm kind of structuring the book and organizing it in a way that I think is going to be helpful to the reader. But it's also, I feel like, my job to help authors say what they're saying in a way that's really intelligible to a lay reader. I mean, we're very good in our areas of expertise, but it's really difficult to write for a popular audience. And I don't want to say dumb it down. That's not what it is.
Sure.
But you communicate differently to an upper division class as you do an intro class, and you communicate to an intro level class different than you do your partner or your kids. You have to tailor the message to the audience. Yeah. So I was surprised in the editorial process about doing that part and helping that part of it. There were things that I didn't pay attention to at all in the show that it's not that it was really subtle. It was there. I just didn't pay attention. It didn't hit me. For example, I didn't pay that close attention to the way the humor is played in the game and the show. I know that it's there. I could have pointed to it, but it didn't hit me until I read the piece in the book that's the thing that Joel says Ellie reminds him of Sarah about. And it's like, oh wow, that's really important. Then we need to go back and think about the way in which he's she's using humor to connect with him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a musician. I don't listen to a whole lot of music, especially after the 80s. Music is not something that really hits me. There's several pieces in the book about the importance of music and Joel's guitar and what that means, and how heartbreaking it is when she can't play it, the music at the end of the second game. She lost her finger. Completely missed that the first time that I played it. I knew it was there. Like, I could have told you that it happened if I was making a checklist. I didn't take time, I think, to properly reflect about what it meant. And so I think the book is really great at drawing attention to things that I wouldn't pay attention to, and hopefully I'm drawing attention to things that maybe the other authors didn't think about.
What a classroom environment, Wade. You talk about creating that space for perspective. I mean, it's a classroom of experts that you've curated into a narrative that everyone can participate in. I love that, Wade.
Well, one of the things that I really like is that, or that I like to say to my students, is that you may not be an expert in anything academic at this point, but you are an expert in your experience and your life up to this point. There's nobody that knows it better than you. Now, there's others that could read into it maybe a little bit more deeply, but you know your experience. So that inherently has a lens that you're going to see the world and these media through that I don't have. So I'm curious about those kind of lenses, and I think that's what this book does so well. It's interesting to me to hear you say, I hadn't really thought about the humor. I hadn't really thought that deeply about the music to the extent that some of these authors and contributors did. For me, the music was massive for me, to the point that the second game came out height of the pandemic in 2020, I decided it's time for me to learn guitar. Everybody was making bread. I was learning guitar. That was the thing. And so I learned Future Days. And it was that moment of I know 3 songs on the guitar, and that's one of them. And it became this sort of integrated form of processing of that scene in the game and all of the scenes in the game. And that, I think, is what I love most about what you're doing, not only in this book, but also in your classroom. You're offering space for people to share the way that they're finding meaning. And that, again, it's absolutely incredible for the students when they see that kind of real life relevance. Is that something that you've seen in your classroom? Do they ignite that? Are you able to use some of this stuff in the actual classroom setting?
Yeah, I mean, I've been teaching at the university level since 2007. So I've tried this coming at using popular culture in different ways. And sometimes it's video games and sometimes it's not. One of the first exercises I did with students more than a decade ago is I had them create a journal of things when they were watching or playing or listening to something and connect it to the philosophy that we're reading. So they might have watched The Matrix and said, hey, this reminds me of Descartes because that's what we were reading. Mm-hmm. Or, whatever. I watched Blade Runner and it reminded me of this. Or I watched, I listened to this music and it reminded me of this. And that's the most important thing that I want students, at least in my intro class, to walk away from, is to say that philosophy is not this ivory tower, highfalutin thing that happens in a college classroom. And then when you leave, that's it. That's the end of it.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And they're already doing it. They're already thinking about it. They just don't recognize that they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so good. I love the journal idea. Wow.
Yeah.
How fitting for The Last of Us, too.
I have it from 15 years ago, and I occasionally pull them out, and I think these are really great case studies. When I was at UK, I taught an upper division class on philosophy of science fiction, and it was a way to, again, incorporate popular culture elements. We would watch The Matrix, or we would watch Blade Runner, or we would watch, Back to the Future or Terminator. Those things can tell us something about the world. Yeah. How is time structured? What is the nature of consciousness? The Last of Us does those same things too. There's a chapter in the book about, are the cordyceps conscious, and what does consciousness even mean?
Yeah. I had to not read the book late at night because it got me to intellectually awaken, like
Yeah.
not in like a, I mean, yes, in an awakened sense, like I was gaining knowledge, but I would just sitting there and I'm reading, and you have these moments where you go, oh crap.
Yeah.
And you start trailing off. And I was talking to my friends about it when I was kind of telling them what I was up to today. And I was like, you don't understand. This book is opening too many little doors, because when you have that myriad of perspectives, which I think is some of the value of this. What do you call this? Is it a compilation? Is it like an anthology
That's an
novel?
edited volume.
Edited volume, that's the official term. Okay, great. Because I haven't read a ton of books that are that kind of edited volume. Usually it's kind of one voice that goes through it, and so you either connect with the voice and you kind of it's a good fit, or it's not. But there's something about reading a book about philosophy from 23, 24 different perspectives that you get a little bit from each person, and then you guys have done a fantastic job in weaving together a general narrative that kind of builds on itself. There really aren't too many questions that you get to that haven't been somewhat substantiated by something earlier in the book. So it's a good walk into curiosity as you approach different topics and the flow. At least it was for me. I have some... go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and that's by design too. I mean, this is a long-standing series. Bill Irwin has been doing this. He's the series editor. He's been doing this for 20 plus years. When I was an undergraduate, one of my undergraduate professors, Scott Davison, published a piece in the Lord of the Rings in philosophy. Yeah, and it was a way for me to say, oh, this is my first exposure to say, wait a second, you can take philosophy and then engage with it in popular culture. All the books are like that. They're all edited volumes with a bunch of people coming from their own expertise, and you might not be interested in all of it. You might not be interested in all 24 pieces, but you might be interested in the music part, or you might be interested in the political elements. There's a section of the book on the political elements. You might be interested on the moral components. There's a whole section of the book on Joel's choice. Yeah, at the end of the first game. So you can jump around the book and find things that are, it's not a monograph where you've got, if you don't like the first 100 pages, you can't read the next 100 pages. Right. Jump around, find things that interest you.
As far as an introduction in a third-party space to conversation too, it's amazing it's because it's like, hey, listen, read this essay. If you're talking to a friend or somebody that you want to discuss argumentation, having like a kind of philosophical third space to be able to talk around an issue is a really great way to understand people better and to get closer. But it's kind of hard to hand them an entire tome or a textbook. Right. So to be able to have that, hey, you play guitar and you played The Last of Us. Let's talk about the musicality and what that meant and why that was such an important part of the flow of the video game, and why it was important that they made the full engagement with it optional. Like that, one of the things that I love is that the guitar often is just sitting off in the corner, and you choose to engage with it, and that's kind of that's how guitars work, is that it's always there, but there's seasons of life where for some reason I don't see it the same way and I choose not to pick it up. And then there's seasons of life that I find myself picking it up even more often. And the game gives you the freedom to do that. Like you have a specific guitar interactive scene, but even in the second game, that guitar is just sitting there in the auditorium. And it's so similar to these philosophical concepts. It's there. They're always present. We're always making meaning, but we're not intentionally choosing to go and pick those up and engage with them at a time. But it doesn't mean that they're not sitting on the wall, sitting in the corner of that auditorium the whole time. What is it, and what advice do you give people for what it's like to just pick up that philosophical argument? When you have a spark and curiosity, how do you encourage folks to foster that?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think part of the answer is, I think that philosophy, if you're thinking about it not as the content so much, but as the skills that you're developing, the skills are worth developing on there. Like that's intrinsically valuable, and that's extrinsically valuable too. Yeah. So why should somebody care about philosophy, regardless of the context that you're talking about it? Yeah, it's a discipline that helps you think clearer and write better and think better and communicate better and organize your thoughts and be able to have civil discourse with somebody that you disagree with. And those things are really valuable. I mean, I was teaching relativism yesterday in my intro class, and they were the first class was, they found it hard to talk to each other. And I think they're afraid of confrontation. And you have to almost say, it's okay to disagree. It's scary. I understand that. It's scary. Yeah. But you have a voice, and it's a valuable voice, and it's a useless voice if you're not going to use it. And so you have to help them get the courage to find that voice.
You have a voice, and it's a useless voice if you don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
That's an interesting statement. I mean, it's challenging, right? Like, it's useless if you don't know how to use it, but it is true. I think that we need those big challenges to kind of get over those hesitations sometimes for something like meaning making. I mean, we're talking about making sense of the world, understanding our values, being able to navigate something that, most of us have a fairly tumultuous experience at some point with life meaning in the world. And we wonder, well, what can we do to improve that? And I think it's amazing that the two of you are creating those academic spaces that are safe, that people can discuss their different thoughts and are a great way to approach. That's why I love a game like this. It does it with some extreme means to kind of get there, though, Wade.
Well, and I want to return just for a second. I want to return to something that Wade said earlier about making it such that when we disagree with each other, it's not the end of the world. Right? We often think that our beliefs about something are very much our identity, and so if I have to give up that belief, it's almost like I'm giving up a part of myself. Which is why we think of like arguments as win or lose. And one of the things I hope that maybe the book communicates and the my students walk away from is this: it's okay to be wrong, and it's difficult to be right.
Ooh,
and so the only it's and when you think of it, like it's difficult to be right. The only way that you're going to get closer to it is if you engage with people that you disagree with or something that you might not understand.
Yeah.
Joshua, I want that sold in like Hobby Lobby because it's like the greatest phrase. I need it in my classroom.
I didn't come up with it. I write my student evaluation, the questions. There's a university one, but then there's a separate one. And the very last question on my student evaluation says, what's the most important thing that you learned in this class? And that gives me some kind of feedback about how to structure the classes going forward. And I'm not necessarily fishing for what reading you like the best or what assignment. No. What's the thing that, and a student wrote that. The student wrote, and this was in an intro class probably 5 years ago. It's okay to be wrong and difficult to be right. And I put that down, and that has sat with me for like 5 years. And I thought, holy cow, if that's the thing that they walked away from, that's amazing. That's fantastic.
That is one of the best life lessons and compliments that a student can give to your teaching. My gosh. Yeah. Absolutely incredible. That's going to carry me through this day. So thank you for that. I want to move into some specifics about the game. You have spent a wild amount of time thinking through the themes of this game, not just for yourself, but editing a lot of all of these essays in this volume. And so I want to know, when it comes to The Last of Us Part 1 and then Part 2, so I'd like to do both of them, what are the scenes, the themes, the tropes even, that really began to resonate with you on a personal level and that you have seen really, really take hold of people, maybe the authors and contributors, maybe some of your students? What is it about The Last of Us Part 1 especially that is worth playing and considering?
And if you'll list them all alphabetically.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to point to two things. I was going to ask for permission to do it, but I'm just going to do it. So I think in the first game, it's hard to not think that the most important thing that's driving the narrative is, and the most philosophically interesting thing is Joel learning to take Ellie on as something like a surrogate daughter and taking on this new responsibility that he didn't have before, like growing to love and care for somebody that he hadn't before, and then what that means in the culmination of the game. I think that's the most important thing that I think about. If I'm trying to talk to somebody about The Last of Us in the elevator, that would be the thing that I would point to is, what do we owe each other? What responsibilities do we have to each other, and how does love fit into those responsibilities? In the show, there's something that's not in the. It's not as it didn't hit me as clear in the game. When they're in the state house in is it episode 2 maybe?
Yeah, episode 2.
The American propaganda is all over the place.
Yeah, it is.
And I didn't recognize it at all until I read Crippen's essay here in the book. And the way that he talks about the cordyceps are growing on the American flag that's still growing there, or that's still flying 20 years later, and it's growing over the bust of George Washington, or whatever it is, and what the political messaging is, I didn't recognize at all.
If you think about the fact that they went through a museum that tells the entire story of the country and how they got there in its early days, that culminates in that moment. It's even more insane. Yeah,
and the thing I didn't really pay attention to is, like, if you think of the cordyceps as like a collective consciousness, and this is a social political entity, and Crippen connects that to like creeping communism and the fear of socialism and the fear of the collective, and I was like, how did I not even recognize this before? And I've watched that, but I can't go back and watch that episode without having this in mind either.
So I'd love for you to share with us a little bit of the process of that, because like my intro level students, like, okay, I just saw fungus growing on the murals and stuff. How do you make that leap from this is an aesthetic thing to there's potentially some meaning making and some symbolizing that's going on?
So first of all, I didn't make the so the royal, how does somebody make? I think every author identifies things that others don't, and that's why it's valuable to do something like an edited volume where you have 20 plus different experts coming at it from their own perspective. So there's experts on humor, and there's experts on medicine, there's experts on psychology, there's experts on consciousness.
Yeah.
So the things that they're identifying are what they're working on. The things that I'm identifying are things that I find valuable, and the things that I'm working on, they're all valuable. But what I'm able to identify is based on my experiences, like my history, my education. Just like when you say your students all are coming at the world from their perspective, they're going to pick out things that I didn't. Which, like, to go back to the example of having the students write the, those journals where they were pinpointing. It's like I'd never thought of that Guns N' Roses song is connected to Hobbes' state of nature, but I can't unsee it now. I wouldn't have thought about that, but I think you're making a compelling case. And you can have anything you want, but you better not take it from me. It's just Hobbes.
Can you explain that just a little bit, like in 2 sentences, if you were going to give the flashcard version of
the Guns N' Roses song?
Well, you can sing the Guns N' Roses song if you want, but tell us a little bit about Hobbes and why that's substantiated.
So Hobbes has this idea that we're self-interested individuals, and given that we're self-interested and there's a finite amount of resources, he thinks that we create government, we create society, we create morals as a result of those two features. And so he envisions this state of nature, and there is a chapter in the book about this too, connecting it to The Last of Us, this state of nature, this place where we don't have government, we don't have morality, we don't have values. What would that state look like? And he says it's solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And so that his view of human nature is like rooted in fear of each other. And so that's, and the Last of Us illustrates that too. I mean, when you have this, what would human nature be like if there's no government to compel you to do good? What are you naturally?
Such an incredible question, because in The Last of Us, part 1, especially, and then moving into part 2, a little bit different, you do have these societies that begin to rise up. Quarantine zones, Phaedra, fireflies. I wonder, how do you make sense of these things? And I'll ask what a lot of people ask: which one's right? Which one should we follow? Right?
And can I tag? I'm going to tag on a question
Yeah.
too. And can you talk a little bit about utilitarianism and how it would be a function of why we would organize and structure ourselves? Because there's a lot of talk about utilitarianism and what it is in this.
Yeah, so utilitarianism is I'm trying to answer both of these questions if I can remember going back to them. So utilitarianism is a moral philosophy that says that the right action is the one that's going to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And so whatever the right thing is always to maximize pleasure. And so a lot of people thought, for example, that Joel's action was morally blameworthy because he killed the doctors that were going to save. I mean, assuming that they actually can develop a cure from Ellie that's going to save mankind, that he was putting the needs of the few over the needs of the many, which is the exact opposite of what the utilitarians want to say. We often use utilitarian thinking. Quarantine zones are a matter of utilitarian thinking. That sometimes you have to exclude the few for the advantage of the many. Organ transplants. I mean, a real life example, organ transplants. When organ transplant boards have to decide who gets this finite amount of resources, they think in terms of utilitarianism. How do we do the most good with this limited amount of resources? Right. And so that is a moral philosophy that might help you make sense of whether an action is praiseworthy or blameworthy. Yeah.
So as it relates to how they decided to organize themselves, we talk about Fedra, we talk about these different communities.
Yeah.
They're putting aside the small differences for some kind of common good, but it's this difference between like large fracture and these marauding bands, and then people decide to give up parts of their individual liberty in order to create a greater sense of safety. So there's some broader thinking around utilitarianism there in the way that they've organized themselves, to get back to Wade's question around kind of how the world coalesced in these different spots.
Yeah, I don't think they're thinking of the organization of these different societal structures in utilitarian terms, though. I actually think they're probably thinking about it in Hobbesian terms, right? Which is that you are in this state that you don't want to live in. And the only way to get out of that is to give up some of your freedom for security. Right? That's it. I mean, there's a lot of different societal structures depicted in the games. I don't know that all of them are organized around trying to do the most good. Some of them might just mean this person wants power. Yeah, he has the ability to exert power. Yeah, or she has the ability to exert power, or they have the ability to exert power, and it's legitimate if the people there allowing them to. It's the consent of the governed. So who is the right view?
And I asked that question tongue in cheek, right? Like it is the question that I think that someone would ask, like, which one would I align with?
No, I think that's totally appropriate. I was going to buy a Last of Us shirt and to wear today, and I went on to look, and there was Firefly shirts. There was a Firefly coffee mug, and I thought, I don't want to buy that. I don't like the Firefly.
I'm not a Firefly.
Well, I can't whistle, so I can't be in that call.
So. I don't want to be with them at, I don't want to be with the cannibals. I don't want to be with that. I don't want to be with the Scars. I don't want to be. I think probably the one that's the best of all of them that's depicted is where they ultimately settle, right? Where they settle in Silver Lake. Yeah. And it's partly because there is no top-down. It doesn't seem like there's a top-down organizational structure. It seems like everybody's working for the common good. Yeah.
It's the only part of the story that I see actual reasonable conflict management, because they just like talk it out after. That never happens. Like, it's the one thing that doesn't really end up with somebody dead in the next 36 seconds in the story,
right?
Which is pretty crazy. There's a section in the book that talks about justice and
Yeah.
when actions are justifiable. Wade, I wonder if we could talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, let's talk
as
about
we
some
kind of jump into
justice.
this section. There's a story told about Neil Druckmann watching playtesters playing the game and asking a question. And I'll tell it, and then you could add to maybe what I missed or add some emphasis if you want. The way that I remember reading it in the book is that he would watch the playtesters play, and they would make kind of this final choice in the game. And depending on the decision that they made, he would ask, "What did you think about this character's decision?" Because you don't have any agency in the Last of Us. You just experience the whole game.
A little agency. You got a little agency.
Very little.
You got a little agency. You don't have to kill the dogs. You don't have to kill the doctors.
Right.
You got this much. It's
Philosophical question, just aside, did you kill the doctor?
No, not the first time. I didn't even know you could kill the doctor.
Better guy than me. I shot everyone. I was like, I will do anything for Ellie.
Yeah, he pointed a scalpel at me. So in
I was
Last
like,
of
we're
Us
done
terms,
here.
you're done.
Yeah,
I was in the moment, man. I don't know.
I don't know that it was me being a good person. Like, I don't even think I recognized that it was a choice. I just walked toward Ellie. Like, I was so completely driven. Like, I've got to get to the girl.
Incredible.
I didn't even think of, like, wait a second, can I do this? And I didn't recognize you could do this till I was watching a playthrough of it later. Yeah.
In 2013, when I finished the game, my roommate at the time was watching playing. We stayed up for hours afterwards just discussing it. And he asked me, he said, "Why did you go in and shoot all the doctors, even the ones that were just like hiding and cowering?" Like, I went through the room.
Yeah.
And I said, like, I had to reason. I was like, because they would come after me.
Yeah.
And I had to make sure that there was not a trace, right? So it's just an interesting dilemma. Evan, go ahead. Sorry to hijack.
Well, it's not like you haven't been going through humans' cordyceps and every other creature
know,
with
everything
a
else
lawnmower for
even
20
that
hours
final
up to that
scene.
point.
Even that whole final scene, though, not just the final room where you don't have to kill the doctors. You can actually sneak around and just make it to the door. You don't have to kill everybody.
I was very much like the show, Joel.
Yeah. No, I was John Rambo. They've got guns. It's time to go.
They give you the big guns too, and a lot of ammo.
No, that's right. It's like, if you've got a flamethrower, you use a flamethrower.
I did.
Right? Yeah, that's exactly
I was resourceful.
Okay, so Neil Druckmann's watching people, and they're watching this particular scene that we're talking about, and he would ask the playtesters, "Do you think Joel's choice was justified, or what did you think of Joel's choice?" And they said that there was a pretty big delineation. If they were non-parents, people thought that Joel's choice was about 50-50 justified, 50-50 not. But they said if the playtesters were parents, it was almost 100%. Every parent said, yeah, totally justified. This is exactly it. Tell us a little bit about why you think that is and why that's so impactful when it comes to the justification of Joel's actions. Then we'll talk about justification of our own or others' actions as a philosophical concept.
Yeah. So I published a piece before the stuff coming out in the Last of Us book. I published a separate article a couple years ago arguing that the narrative that Joel was a villain was mistaken. Because my impression was that he was, and I didn't even have kids at that point. My impression was that he wasn't mistaken. And the argument that I gave in that paper was that at least some of our moral obligations are due to the roles that we occupy. And I think it was easier for parents to identify with Joel as a parent and thinking that the job of a parent is to protect your kids no matter what.
Yeah.
Joel has obligations to humanity, but those are far lower in his realm of, priorities than protecting Ellie. That's the whole narrative of the game, is he doesn't feel obligated to her at all. And it gets to the point where he's willing to do anything to protect her, even lie to her to protect her from herself. Right. Because she's a child. And so I think parents identify with that more clearly than non-parents. That, I would do anything to protect my kids. And that's something that Troy Baker came and, the voice actor for Joel, said he didn't understand. His view changed. He thought that he was playing a villain at first, and then he had kids. And then I'm pretty sure that I'd have to go back and look at the quote. He said, I was wrong. I think his actions are, he was doing the right thing.
I do remember so many people having that idea of like, it's what a twist at the end
Yeah.
for Joel to end up being the villain.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was actually on the Today Show after the TV show aired a few years ago, because they had a full discussion of like, did Joel do the right thing? Which I thought was just hilarious on the Today Show, right? It's on like this national thing that they're having this conversation that we had in 2013. But it is interesting to see how people have evolved. In light of the second game, because we're going through season 1 and then season 2 of the show with this lecture series. In light of the second game, how has your opinion, your perspective about the first game changed? Has any of the philosophical leanings and lenses, have they been impacted by that?
I don't think so. I think the changes that the show made to the game, I thought were almost always for the better. That they had to make some narrative choices. I have no idea how they're going to structure the second season.
We don't either, but we're doing a whole show with it.
That's true.
Well, it's. I think the thing that makes the second game so special was the thing that made it really so controversial, is that you play half the game as Abby.
Yes.
And a lot of people hated that because they didn't identify with Abby. But I think that was the point, is I think Naughty Dog wanted you to occupy the role of the enemy. And when you occupy the role, when you're thinking, this is something I try to say in my paper for the book, when you're trying to occupy the role of the enemy, you kind of have to, you grow to sympathize with them. And that's the culmination of that part of it, is they recognize something in each other that they didn't before.
So it reminds me of the chapter about tribalism and the othering of others, and what it takes and what's necessary to overcome the root kind of nature and cause of tribalism in the way that we approach situations. And it was that forced perspective for 20-something hours. Because I remember the first time when that happens in that game, and I was like, okay, I thought I was near the end of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really did. And then I was like, wait, why am I picking up experience in a flashback?
Right.
Right.
I have a skill tree.
Then you know, yeah.
And that's the only thing that potentially worries me about the second the show going forward is, I mean, and this takes us back to a point that we were talking about earlier. When you're watching it, you're just seeing Ellie, and you're going to see Abby's story unfold as somebody else. There's something unique about having to occupy the role of Abby, and you're not seeing Abby do X. You're doing X. That makes you identify with that person more, just as the parents were identifying with Joel in the game.
We got to have full faith in Craig Mazin.
Yeah.
I have no concerns.
Right.
I'm ready to buckle up, strap in, put on my space helmet, open up my journal, and ready to go.
Well, it may be more positive, to be perfectly honest, because there is a little bit of dissociation that can happen by watching and spectating, rather than, I am this person.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious how that's all going to kind of wrap out. One of the things that we talk about on the show all the time, and you just really hit on it, Joshua, is proximity produces empathy. Or at least a crisis of empathy, where if you can overcome the crisis of that empathy, then you can actually become empathetic, and you can maybe make an ally, or at least have understanding. But if you don't, then you can continue to other the other person. But I love Naughty Dog for forcing that proximity to produce empathy. And as you saw with the reaction and response to the game, people didn't like that dissonance, much like they don't like it in our classes.
Right, yeah. If I have to occupy the role of somebody that I see as the enemy, then that's bad. It's unsafe. It's dangerous. But it's, I think, ultimately a good thing. It's
a fantastic subversion of the play experience, which I think is a big risk. Well, as we're kind of starting to wind down here, I have one last question about some of the philosophical concepts, and it's kind of ending on this idea of hope and optimism. I found that the hope and optimism chapter and discussions to be really interesting in the kind of dystopian environment where everything seems really bleak. I wonder if you could talk about what's so important as a philosophical principle around pessimism versus optimism, and how that contributes to hope, and what it looks like to find hope and use these meaning-making mechanisms and arguments in philosophy to kind of understand, listen, maybe I am approaching this from a place of pessimism. What does it look like to move towards a little bit of optimism, and ultimately to find hope, to be able to have the energy to see things through, to encourage, to believe that the future is undetermined and things could be better? And what is it about this story to you that so illustrates and challenges that idea of hope for us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think hope is important and valuable, and the Last of Us illustrates it so well. But I'm not sure that you can convince somebody through rational argumentation to be hopeful. I don't know if it's sort of a disposition that we have, or if it's something that you just have to say. You need to reflect on the actual state of things, and then your perspective might shift. I can see somebody saying, I'm going to be more reflective about the world, and I'm more pessimistic because I'm, of all the
right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Or you can look at and be more reflective and over different things and say, I'm more optimistic. I think that there's, you read the news and I think I'm a pessimist, and then I see my kids and I think you're going to be okay. You're going to make the world better. So I don't know that you can get there through rational argumentation. I think what philosophy can do is help you be more reflective and encourage you to be more reflective about why the world is the way that it is, and where we can move from there.
Great answer. Very real answer.
Very real answer, and I appreciate it. So one final question from me, and this one really is for the sake of our audience. We enjoy talking to various experts. We enjoy assessing the text, which is The Last of Us for this day. But ultimately, we want to help our viewers and students to think more deeply. And so if somebody wanted to experiment, to try being an armchair philosopher, what do they need to do? What kind of questions would they ask? How do you go through the process of reflecting deeply?
You go through the process of reflecting deeply. The snarky answer is there's a really accessible, fairly cheap book that's available.
Yeah.
Let's
go.
Any online retailer that you can get to engage with it, and walk you through how to engage philosophically with a bunch of different
Links
topics.
in the description, everybody.
Links in the description. That's right. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got questions or comments. Love to hear from fans. Sorry.
No, we were going to pub it for you.
No, we love it.
It's a tough question, because in one sense, like when students come into the classroom, often it's because they have to be there, and so you don't have to convince them to come to the table. What you can do once they're at the table is say, this is why it's valuable to be at this table. But the thing that I would just emphasize is that you're already doing philosophy. I mean, I've said it before, but you're already doing philosophy. You're already oftentimes thinking deeply about things. And there's a value in that. There's a value in understanding yourself and the world around you. And that's the only way that you're going to make the world, better, is by thinking through these deep philosophical issues with each other. And I don't think it's something that you can do alone either. I don't think that you can just go out by Walden Pond and just think on your own and come up with these grand thoughts. Philosophy is best done in a community. Aristotle says if we think that we're doing that, we're either a beast or a god. But whatever it is, we're not human. And so
my research assistants are going to lose their mind because they used that exact phrase in last night or Tuesday night's lecture play. I mean, they're going to lose their minds. They're really deep diving.
Not planned at all. Not planned at all.
Beautiful. I love that.
We need each other. We do. That's the important thing.
Well, and that's such a great thing.
Reach.
From a practical side of things, I want to echo that. If anybody is interested in kind of taking your first step into thinking like a philosopher, you're already doing it. So like Joshua said a little bit earlier, buy a journal. buy one of our Last of Us journals, right? And just begin jotting down the things that you're experiencing. Maybe it's media, maybe it's The Last of Us, maybe it's just life. And try to reflect and notice things. Was there curiosity, similar to the cordyceps on the American flag mural in the State House? Just notice things, and you'll be amazed at the different ways that you're able to see it. So, Joshua, I cannot thank you enough for being
Thank you so
on here.
much.
This has been one of my
a lot
favorite
of fun.
conversations that we've had. You've somehow hyped your book and caused me to think deeply about this regular, seemingly ordinary day. So I'm excited. I'm leaving energized. So thank you so much. How can people find you? You said you love to engage with fans. Are you online? Like, what does it look like?
Not on social media.
Sure.
But they can email me. My contact information is readily available online with a quick Google search.
Okay.
They can reach out that way. I'm happy to hear from anybody and answer questions that they have. And good luck on the podcast going forward. And I'm looking forward to the second season. And
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
you're calling up.
Anything else coming up that you want to promote besides the book? Anything that you are thinking about, right? Like, give
Legend
us
of
a sneak
Zelda?
preview. What's percolating in that mind of yours?
Yeah, so the Legend of Zelda book is hopefully coming out at the end of this year, and
Pack in Switch 2.
it would right. Well, I think they're maybe wanting to time it with the Zelda movie that's coming
Yeah,
out.
I think that's smart.
Yeah.
But I don't know when it's coming out yet. So the release date is a little up in the air at this point. The thing that I'm writing in that's sort of maybe related to this long-term project is what it means to cheat in a video game.
Ooh.
Because I
Tears
was
of the Kingdom?
I had this experience playing Tears of the Kingdom where sorry, I know you've got to get out of here, but there was an experience the first couple of days afterwards. There was this famous glitch that you could do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't update the game.
And I shut my
Take it away.
My friend
Turn
said,
off
"Are
the
you going to
Wi-Fi."
do this?" And I said, "No, I don't want to cheat." And then I thought about it for like 2 hours, and I thought, "Wait, I don't even know what that means." And so the question that the paper is about is not whether we should cheat, but what it even means to cheat, and whether we can cheat. And so the position
I love
that I'm in is that in a single player game, you can't do it. It's impossible to cheat.
Can't wait to have you back on.
That's
Yeah.
terrific. Oh my goodness.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Let me do some laurels real quick as we wrap up. I want to say that this is a Kindle. Sorry, that this is one of the best compilations for being able to take an experience that you have in a video game, have someone read 8 to 12 pages about it, and provide a great space to have a conversation deeper in your life. So if there's an essay in this book that connects with you, that connects to something in the game, but you have a hard time bringing up maybe things that you experience in games that were meaningful to you, it's difficult to articulate, read this book, or at least look at the topics, understand what they are, and then share them with people in your lives. Just they're going to take, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes to read that page, and then you're going to be able to have a great discussion about it because it sparks curiosity. The notes section is amazing. So much easier to pursue further reading because everybody has some great references if you become interested in the concepts. I have more questions than when I started reading this book.
That's great.
And that's perfect.
That's
That's
great.
exactly where I want to be. So thanks for taking the time to do that. And everybody, if you enjoy The Last of Us, you really, really, really need to have this as companion material because it takes it to the next level.
I appreciate that, guys. Thanks so much.
You bet. Joshua, thank you so much for
Thank you.
taking the time to be with us. Everybody, go check out the book. It is in the description of this video. And remember that we are continuing in our Last of Us lecture series. On Mondays, you're going to get episode recaps for both Season 1 all the way through wherever Season 2 ends. And then on Tuesday nights, we do our lecture playthroughs of the corresponding segment of the game with that week's episode of the TV show. And then on Wednesday, you'll continue to get expert interviews and discussions just like this one. Hope that you are enjoying it. And I also hope that you will remember one key phrase. I know that I'm plastering it on everything today, that it is okay to be wrong and it is difficult to be right. Wow. So no matter what darkness you're in, remember, look for the light. We'll see you next time.
Bye,
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks so much to Joshua Horn for the interview. We had a fantastic time. Thanks to Husky by the Geek for our theme music. Thanks to Nick Smith for our graphics. But most of all, thanks to you. This program is brought to you by viewers like you, and we so appreciate you. We hope everything is going great in your world. You're going to make it. You're going to figure it out. And we are looking forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye-bye.